Kash Patel didn't just stumble today, he collapsed in front of a federal judge who came back with a ruling so explosive, Washington is still in shock. We're talking a full-blown meltdown as the judge shredded Patel's excuses, exposed his shifting stories, and warned him he's inches from contempt and possible jail. Lawmakers are furious, investigators are circling, and the cover-ups he's been hiding for months are suddenly blowing wide open. This isn't spin. This is a power structure falling apart in real time, and Patel knows it. And the craziest part, what the judge said next changed everything, and nobody saw it coming.
I'm not going anywhere. If you want to criticize my 16 years of service, please bring it on.
Well, in just hours, FBI Director Kash Patel is scheduled to face lawmakers again after a very contentious hearing yesterday. Several Democratic senators hammering him over firing decisions and falsely announcing the capture of a suspect in the Charlie Kirk case. Patel pushed back, at times getting into verbal shouting matches with lawmakers as he defended his record.
National criminal enterprise. He's currently on the FBI's, and has been, top 10 most wanted list. He controls one of the most prolific and violent drug trafficking organizations in this world. He is currently the largest distributor of cocaine in Canada. Wedding collaborates closely with the Sinaloa cartel, a foreign terrorist organization, to flood not only American but also Canadian communities with cocaine coming from Colombia. His organization is responsible for importing approximately 60 metric tons of cocaine a year.
You know things are broken at the top when a federal judge basically has to look the sitting FBI director in the eye and say, "You are not special. You follow the law like everyone else," or you start thinking about a jail cell. That is not some routine courtroom moment. That is the alarm system of the rule of law going off. And in this case, it's going off because of Kash Patel. According to the reporting you've just heard, Patel has spent months doing the same dance we've seen from Trump world again and again. Slow-walking subpoenas, hiding documents, inventing new excuses every time a judge or a member of Congress gets close to the truth. This isn't a one-off misunderstanding. This is a pattern. And now, finally, a federal judge has basically said, "Enough, you're out of road." So let's lay this out clearly. There are three big categories of documents Patel has allegedly been fighting to keep under wraps.
All of these narcotics are enabled by our enemies to go after our youth and our communities and kill and destroy American civilization. Under President Trump's leadership, we have been shutting that down since day one. As the Attorney General mentioned, this is an indictment, an additional indictment, an arrest of multiple subjects, nearly a dozen more, and that brings the total to approximately 36 indicted. And you'll hear the details from the tremendous team established here by the Attorney General. Most importantly, you do not get to be a drug kingpin and evade the law. Make no mistake about it. Ryan Wedding is a modern-day iteration of Pablo Escobar. He's a modern-day iteration of El Chapo Guzman. This Justice Department and this FBI will work with our Canadian counterparts and the government officials across the world to bring him to justice. He is responsible for engineering a narco-trafficking and narco-terrorism program that we have not seen in a long time. He will not evade justice. We are here today because this Department of Justice, behind Attorney General's brilliant leadership and the Deputy Attorney General, have made it clear to the American people with the indictments they have brought that law enforcement and agencies like this FBI will lead the effort to go out there and make sure these animals are brought to justice. And that's exactly what we will do. This step, this interagency step, is a huge, huge step towards obtaining justice for so many American lives lost. And so many Americans.
First, the Epstein files. Material Congress has explicitly ordered released because the public has a right to know how a serial abuser operated inside elite political and social circles. Second, internal FBI records about agents who were pushed out in what looks like a political purge. Third, investigation materials related to Trump that Congress and the courts have a legal right to review. Every one of those buckets goes directly to questions of power and accountability. Who gets investigated and who gets protected? Who gets punished for doing their jobs? And who gets promoted for covering things up? And most importantly, who does the FBI really answer to? The Constitution or one man sitting in Mar-a-Lago? Now, Patel's defense has basically been a rotating menu of reasons why he allegedly can't comply. At first, it's executive privilege. When that gets challenged, suddenly it's all about ongoing investigations. When that starts to crumble, it becomes sealed court orders and national security concerns. Each time one excuse gets exposed as thin, another one shows up to take its place. Judges have a word for that: bad faith. When someone is trying to follow the law, you see consistency. They might lose legal fights, but their story doesn't change every time they get cornered. When someone is trying to avoid accountability, you see what we're seeing described here with Patel: stall, delay, switch explanations, blame some other legal process. Pretend your hands are tied by orders that don't actually say what you claim they say. That's why this hearing matters so much. The judge, after months of this back and forth, reportedly comes in having actually read the sealed orders that Patel keeps invoking. And instead of nodding along, the judge tells Patel, in open court, that those orders do not prevent the release he's been refusing to carry out. In other words, the legal barrier Patel has been using as a shield doesn't exist. Think about that for a second. That means when Patel sat in front of Congress and said under oath, "I can't release this because the court sealed it," he wasn't just being cautious. If the judge's reading is right, he was misleading the people's representatives about what the law actually requires. And once you're under oath, that's not just spin. That's the edge of perjury. Perjury is not some obscure technical crime. It's the foundation of whether any of this can work. If powerful people can lie under oath with no consequences, then hearings are theater, subpoenas are props, and the whole idea of oversight is an illusion. The reason lying to Congress is criminal is simple. Without honest testimony, you can't have real accountability. Now, people sometimes ask, why does any of this matter? It's just documents. It's bureaucratic stuff. So let's slow down and look at what's actually in those categories. Start with the Epstein files. We're talking about a man who built his entire life around exploiting victims and buying access. People in power flew on his planes, stayed at his properties, went to his events. He operated for decades, and he did it with protection. We know some of that story already, but the files Patel is allegedly hiding may fill in the gaps. Who knew what? Who looked the other way? Who used their influence to soften the blow? If those documents contain more about Trump's relationship with Epstein, more than what Trump has publicly admitted, that is absolutely information the public deserves to see, especially when Trump is trying to return to power. That is not about gossip. It's about assessing whether someone who wants to lead the country used their status to shield an abuser or to bury evidence. There is no legitimate democratic argument for hiding that. Then look at the internal FBI records on fired agents. Those aren't just HR files. They're a window into whether the FBI director turned law enforcement into a loyalty test. Were people forced out because they did something wrong? Or were they forced out because they worked on cases Trump didn't like, or because they wouldn't bend investigations away from Trump and his allies? Whistleblowers and fired agents are reportedly telling courts and Congress the second scenario is what really happened. They say they were targeted for doing their jobs, for following the evidence where it led. If their claims line up with internal emails, memos, and meeting notes, then we're not just talking about bad management. We're talking about a systematic effort to purge the FBI of anyone who wouldn't play political enforcer. That's a nightmare scenario for a democracy. The whole point of an independent FBI, flawed as it is that it's supposed to follow the law even when that makes powerful people uncomfortable. The moment agents start worrying, if I touch this case, I might get fired, the system is already compromised. It pushes good people out, and it rewards those who are willing to bend the rules. Layer on top of that the Trump-related investigation files. These are the cases and documents that could show where criminal or unethical conduct was being explored, and where, under Patel's leadership, the brakes may have been slammed on. If those case files show a pattern of interference, slow walking, or burying leads when they pointed toward Trump, then Patel isn't just making bad calls. He's helping to create a two-tiered system where the law aggressively targets some people and tiptoes around others. And this is where the judge's reaction becomes the turning point. Because for years, Trump loyalists in government have basically been betting that the system won't truly enforce its own rules against them. They'll fight subpoenas, claim privilege, throw every possible argument at the wall, and assume that by the time it all gets sorted, the political winds will have shifted and their problems will have gone away. This time, at least in this courtroom, that bet might be failing. The judge isn't buying the excuses. The judge isn't accepting sealed orders as a magic phrase that stops all scrutiny. The judge is reportedly saying, in substance, "I've read the orders. They do not prevent what you say they prevent. You were told to turn over the documents. You did not. You are out of options." That's why the word contempt is so important. Contempt of court is how the judiciary defends itself against people who treat its orders as optional. Fines are one thing. Jail is another. When a judge warns an FBI director that jail is on the table, that is the system telling one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in the country, "You are not the law. You are subject to it." Now, if you're Kash Patel, you're in a no-win situation. If you comply and finally hand over everything, you risk exposing politically damaging material about Trump, about the Epstein connections, and about your own role in the purges and the obstruction. Those documents can strengthen lawsuits by fired agents. They can fuel congressional investigations. They can expose contradictions between your public testimony and the written record. If you keep defying the court, on the other hand, you risk being held in contempt and possibly jailed until you comply. You risk turning yourself into the symbol of lawlessness you've spent months pretending to be defending the country from. You risk becoming the face of a narrative that says Trump's FBI director would literally rather go to jail than tell the truth about what he's done. For Trump, this is a disaster in slow motion. The entire point of installing loyalists in key positions is to keep the paper trail from ever seeing daylight. If those loyalists start to crack under legal pressure, if judges call out the lies, if prosecutors open perjury probes, if whistleblowers' claims line up with internal documents, then the protective wall Trump built starts to crumble. And when that wall crumbles, what comes out isn't just embarrassing headlines. It's evidence. It's sworn testimony. It's written orders and emails and memos that can be used in courtrooms and hearings long after the news cycle moves on. That's why this matters for 2026, 2028, and beyond. Because once the facts are on the record, they don't just disappear when the next election rolls around. Now, let's talk about the FBI itself for a moment. Because there's a tragedy here that goes beyond any one director or any one president. There are people inside that building who have spent decades trying to do their jobs with integrity, sometimes in very difficult circumstances. They've made mistakes, the institution has made serious mistakes, and those need scrutiny. But when someone at the top turns the Bureau into a political shield for one man, those career agents pay the price. They're the ones who get cut out of briefings. They're the ones whose cases get reassigned or shut down. They're the ones who have to look victims in the eye and say, "I'm sorry, we're not moving forward," even when they know they should. And when they speak up, they risk retaliation, unless the law actually steps in to protect them. That's why whistleblowers are so central here. Protected by statute or not, it takes courage to come forward and say this isn't about politics. This is about the director abusing his power. When their stories start lining up with what judges see in sealed orders, and when their stories are backed up by documents that have been withheld, that's not just internal drama. That's a roadmap for reform, if anyone is willing to follow it. So where does this leave us? It leaves us at a crossroads where one of two things happens. In one scenario, Patel keeps stonewalling. The judge blinks. Congress goes through the motions, and no real consequences ever land. If that happens, the message to every future official is simple. You can ignore court orders. You can mislead Congress. You can weaponize an entire federal agency for political purposes. And at worst, you'll retire to a cushy consulting gig and a couple of angry op-eds. In the other scenario, this is the moment where the system finally says, no, you don't get to do that. Patel faces real sanctions. The perjury allegations get investigated seriously. The documents he's been hiding actually see the light of day. Fired agents get their day in court. Whistleblowers are vindicated. And future FBI directors learn a crucial lesson. Independence is not a blank check. You are independent within the law, not above it. Which outcome we get will say a lot about what kind of country we actually are right now. We like to tell ourselves stories about being a nation of laws, about no one being above the rules. But that's only true if the rules are enforced against the people who write them, interpret them, and carry them out. And that's what makes this case so important. It's not glamorous. It's not a fiery speech on the House floor or a dramatic raid on live television. It's something quieter and in some ways more profound. A judge reading the orders, comparing them to what an FBI director has been saying, and deciding whether the truth still matters enough to risk a constitutional fight. If Patel is forced to comply, if he's held accountable when he doesn't, if lying under oath actually carries consequences, then there's still hope that the machinery of democracy can correct itself, even after years of abuse. If he isn't, then we're drifting into a world where the law is mostly a performance for ordinary people, and something to be outmaneuvered for the powerful. At the end of the day, that's the real question this story is asking us. Is the law bigger than one president and his loyalists or not? Do we really believe that court orders bind everyone? Or do we quietly accept that some people get to treat them like suggestions? Because here's the reality. In a healthy democracy, the director of the FBI should never be in a position where a judge has to threaten jail just to get basic compliance. It should never get that far. The fact that we're even here tells you how much damage has already been done. But it also tells you something else. The fact that this judge is pushing back, that whistleblowers are speaking out, that fired agents are suing, that members of Congress are calling for real investigations, all of that is democracy trying to fight back. The outcome isn't guaranteed. It never is. But if the rule of law is going to mean anything, it has to mean this. Not even Kash Patel, not even Donald Trump gets to lock away the truth forever. Not about Epstein, not about political purges, not about obstruction of justice at the very top of the FBI. So when you hear about sealed orders and document fights and contempt hearings, don't tune it out. That's not background noise. That's the sound of the system deciding whether it still has the courage to hold its own enforcers accountable. And in this moment, with this judge and this director, it really is that simple. Either the law wins or the people who think they're bigger than the law do.